Nitro K-9, real dog training. Greetings, dog lovers everywhere. You're listening to Nitro K-9's Real Dog Training. I'm Dave Tucker, and today's guest is Blake Adams, a Nitro K-9 client right here in Seattle. Blake is going to tell us about the training experience he's had with his dog Rolo and the Nitro K-9 staff. Blake is going to give us a review of just how the process works in case you're interested in taking your dog to Nitro K-9 for training. Nitro K-9 is the premier dog training organization in the Seattle area. Nitro K-9 has developed a worldwide reputation primarily due to the experiences and wisdom of Steve Walter, the owner. For more information, go to nitrok9.com. Hey, Blake, thanks for joining us.
All right.
Hey, we really appreciate you talking to us. I know that the information you have is going to be useful for a lot of people out there thinking about training their dog. So, Blake, I heard that you got in touch with Steve long before you were considering training your dog. In fact, it was before you even had a dog.
Okay, yeah. Our first contact with Steve was my wife reaching out to him before we had even decided what kind of dog to get. Probably a year before we got our dog, Rolo. She had done a whole bunch of research, and we've done some together, but my wife, Brooke, really sort of took the lead on finding Steve and Nitro. And she reached out to him, and they got in communication about the kind of dog breeds he thought would be good of the ones we were considering. And we both realized, wow, this guy is like going to be really fun to work with because he's got lots of ideas and he's really responsive. And that's been our whole experience with Steve and everyone at Nitro has been, just that they know a lot about dogs, not just about training, but about dog breeds and different temperaments, about nutrition, about medical stuff, and other things that crop up with, owning dogs. It was kind of a great start. It really set the tone. Like, well, these guys are going to be really great to work with. And that's definitely been our experience.
Now, so he suggested you get an Australian Labradoodle? Was that the suggestion?
Yeah, we were considering other kinds of doodles. Essentially, he thought that a Labradoodle would be kind of the perfect dog for our unique set of, kind of what we were looking for.
So, Blake, I understand you did a little dog training as a child. How does that history differ from what you've experienced with Nitro K-9 today?
So when I was 14 years old, we got a dog, and I wanted a dog for a long time. And I finally sort of wore my parents down or got to the age where they thought that I would be responsible enough to care for the dog. And it was a golden retriever puppy. And my parents were like, well, you need to train the dog. We want to have a well-trained dog. Can you handle that responsibility? And I proved that I could basically by reading every book that I could find in the library. And, I set to work, and I had like a choke collar, and I had a 6-foot leash and a 40-foot leash, and I had a bunch of treats, and we lived by a big open space park. And I did the best that I could with the knowledge that I had at the time, and it went okay. But he was I would say, an okay trained dog. He's kind of like typical of what I tend to run into around Seattle. He could walk on the leash pretty well without pulling too much. And he had sort of sometimes an off-leash heel. And he came most of the time when I called him. It was just kind of like, we loved him. He was a good dog. It was that kind of an attitude. And flash forward to just this year, we wanted to get a dog, and I wanted a do-over. This could be a great opportunity to really have a really awesome dog. I want a really well-trained dog. Like, I want a dog that's high level of obedience training, that's just fun to be with all the time, that can get along in all kinds of situations, that's just well-behaved, and people want to be around my dog, and he's really great to live with. So my wife and I did some research, and we knew I didn't want to do treats because I didn't want a treat-based sort of training system, because that was problematic with my dog growing up. He would only really be obedient if I had some high-level treat. Otherwise, he could choose to ignore me if he wanted to. And I had no recourse. If he was off-leash, I'd nothing.
Right.
And so we found Nitro K-9, and the rest is sort of history in my mind. It's the best thing ever that we could have found.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
So what made you choose Nitro?
read a lot of reviews and read a bunch of Steve's articles, and something really spoke to me about the bond-based training rather than treats. I remember, I forget the title of the article, but Steve was talking about how he, watches the eyes of dogs who are being trained with treats, and they're just fixated. They're focused entirely on the treat, whether it's in a fanny pack or in a pocket, or, when they hear the rustle of the Ziploc bag or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They are like focused, but they're focused on the location of that treat, not on the handler per se. And so something really touched me about like, oh, it's about the relationship. It's about the bond. It's about the dog making eye contact with you and saying, what do you got for me? What's next? And I watched some videos. I was sold. I was like, that the kind of dog and the kind of relationship with my dog that I want.
So then let's talk about the evaluation. For those of you who don't know, Nitro K-9 has an evaluation for each dog who enters the training program. Blake, could you walk us through that process?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to remember how old Rolo is. I think he was somewhere between 12 and 16 weeks old. He's a medium-sized Labradoodle puppy. A lot of people come to Nitro, as they should, for anxiety or aggression or things like that they're having some sort of problem that they want to solve. That wasn't me at all. I had a puppy. He was pretty much a blank slate. Steve, checked him out. I remember being impressed that he was like checking out kind of his overall health. It wasn't just a behavioral assessment. He was like feeling his hips. He was giving him a whole look over. He was touching his belly. And, Steve's not a vet, but he knows a lot about dogs. And I remember just being really impressed that this was a very holistic behavior assessment. This was not just let's put him on the ground and see what he does.
Yeah.
It was really holistic, and that definitely struck me. We ended up talking about nutrition, and we talked about a lot of things that day that were really valuable to me as a dog owner, especially with a puppy. We talked about crate training. I mean, he was just a wealth of knowledge about a lot of things. Rolo sailed through the behavior assessment because he didn't, he's a puppy, and he's like I said, he was kind of a blank slate. So that part was pretty easy. So we had time to talk about other things, and I was concerned. I was like, is he ready for hour-long sessions? Because Steve was recommended that we do hour-long sessions. I remember what Steve said. He said, I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't think he was ready for it. He had this confidence that like this dog, he can do it. And I was like, okay. I was skeptical. And Steve was absolutely right, which, of course, he's been doing this for 30 years and I've had one dog before in my life.
Yeah. So, he knows a little bit about dogs.
I'm going to go with his opinion on this. My wife and I went to that together, and it was very professional, very conversational, and we both felt like we were in good hands and that we'd made the right choice.
So what was your first lesson like?
Yeah, so my first lesson, we picked out, a leash. Steve has this whole system of leash work. He has these certain types of leashes that he likes to use. And now that I do this leash work with my dog, I totally see why. They're really great leashes. And so we fitted him with one of those and with a Springer collar, also known as a prong collar, which I had my concerns really about using with a puppy. But my concerns were, I just thought, is he going to hate this? Is he going to start to fear me? Is this going to be like too heavy-handed for him? And Steve reassured me that used properly, these training collars they're not intended to hurt a dog. They're not torture devices. And I put it actually around my arm and I sort of pulled on it and I realized, with a little bit of leash pressure, I can communicate to him that like, hey, eyes up, like attention over here. And I was just surprised, it's clearly not hurting him. And it's really like kind of amazing to get him to look up and focus on what we're doing. So
yeah, I can compare it to like an adult holding a child's hand, a slight pull, a slight squeeze. It's just kind of a constant communication.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it shouldn't, it really shouldn't hurt. Like that's not the point, is not like to cause the dog pain. It's to get their attention. And like you said, like a hand squeeze, the nice thing about them is you can use very little leash pressure. And I remembered my golden retriever growing up, I used a more traditional choker chain. And I used to have to crank on that thing. And he started to get, kind of like resistant to it, At some point, he just didn't care. He's like, pull all you want. I'm going this way.
Yeah.
And I've never had that, because Rolo sort of was trained with a Springer collar from day one. He doesn't do that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you gotten any feedback from those who see you with the prong collar?
Steve and I talk about this sometimes. I have not, and I'm shocked because I know that there are lots of people who would be happy to speak their mind, about those to me, and I'm relishing the opportunity. I just can't wait. Like, go ahead, just watch my dog and the relationship I have with my dog, and then try to tell me that I'm hurting him. You don't really have an argument there. That said, I see people with those kinds of collars, or worse, cheap knockoffs of Springer collars on their dogs, and they clearly don't know how to use them. And I do feel sorry for those dogs, because the dog is not focused on the handler, and it has this training collar on, but it's not being used for any training. I don't just put that collar on my dog and tie him up. But I see people not adopting that philosophy, and those are people I want to talk to.
Understood. Yeah.
From a place of love for the dog, care for the dog.
So now, how many lessons have you had with Steve?
I've had 8.
And what's the difference between Rolo now and then? What's on his resume? What can he accomplish now that he couldn't do before?
He has a great on-leash heel, just like trots right next to, with head kind of turned in. Doesn't sniff the ground while we're on a walk. He can potty on command. So if I can tell that he kind of wants to sniff, he might want to potty, I can just stop and say potty and he'll go. He can sit, obviously. He can stay. He can do all of this stuff off leash. His recall is consistent. He can stop. So if we're playing fetch or something and I throw the ball and a biker is coming, this happens a lot because I live by Interlake Park where a lot of bikers go through, and I'll let him off leash down there and we'll play fetch. And then I'll see a biker coming. I can say stop from a long distance and he will stop. And I can say either sit or stay, and he will stay until that biker passes. And then I can say fetch and he'll bring the ball back. That's really fun. We're working a lot right now on the stand stay. The next thing is going to be a reverse heel.
Oh, wow.
Which there's lots of videos of Stephanie doing with her dog Thor. And that's what I want. They're like my idols on that one.
Yes, Stephanie and Thor have quite the following.
If we're trying to teach him to put his toys away in a basket at home.
That would be so cool. I would give the command, clean house. That would be great.
People ask me, like, what tricks does he do? And I'm like, I'm not really training tricks.
Exactly.
We'll get there maybe if we run out of other things, but I want like useful commands, useful obedience. I say bed, he goes to his bed. There's lots of things probably that I'm not even thinking of that he's been trained to do. I have achieved all of my goals with him and more. I'm like thinking up new things that I want to teach him to do. I mean, I'm so far beyond my initial expectations of what I wanted with my dog. And this is 8 1-hour lessons. And I work hard in between lessons. So that's
really important. Yeah.
That's why. And the lessons are like training me how to be an amazing dog handler. And then I work hard to get the obedience sort of dialed in.
Well, we're a little short on time, so we're going to have to carry this interview over to the next podcast. But be sure to check us out on December 30th, and you'll hear part 2 of Blake's interview. Be sure to contact Steve with your questions or comments about this podcast. Just go to the webpage, nitrok9.com, and click on the Contact tab at the top right corner. Steve loves to hear from the listeners, so make sure you let him know that you're listening to the podcast. I'm Dave Tucker for Nitro K-9's Real Dog Training, reminding you that a trained dog is a happy dog, and at the other end of that leash is a happy dog owner. Nitro K-9, Real Dog Training.
Episodes of Real Dog Training are released on the 10th, 20th, and 30th of each month. For more information, go to nitrok9.com.